Hi everyone, thanks for watching. Next time we'll be talking about Ghost in the Shell standalone complex, the best anime ever. See you then. See you then. See you then. See you then.
I may have gotten slightly distracted.
What is up, my fellow gangsters? For a minute there you thought I'd forgotten, huh? Or maybe that I'd been goofing around with other projects and just didn't feel like getting to this one. What you didn't realize was that it was all part of my grand design for a little something I call Best Series Ever, Ghost in the Shell. And I'm sorry to report that you got gamered. It was years ago that I first decided that in order to discuss Ghost in the Shell, you must first become Ghost in the Shell. So over the last few years, that's exactly what I've been doing. Many of us have had the experience of not getting gits the first time we saw it, but yeah, that ain't me anymore, bro. I have prepared myself for this task by becoming an expert on all things Ghost in the Shell and consuming decades worth of content. I watched the shows, saw the movies, played the games, read the manga, found countless behind-the-scenes commentaries and interviews with the creators. I got my damn degree in ghostology. And, of course, I read Arthur Kessler's The Ghost in the Machine, all so that I could speak on an educated basis as to what the hell this robo-waifu fuckfest is all about, and that's what I'm here to do. However, when it comes to actually discussing this universe, considering the size of the body of work here, you can't avoid tackling the question of, where do I start? Do you choose a series to start with chronologically, pick your favorite, prioritize popularity or cultural impact? What do you do? Well, I decided to take a different approach. I know I said we were going to be discussing Standalone Complex, and we will, just among many other things. There's no need to travel back decades to find a release that functions as a natural entry point to the series, one that was clearly designed to refresh the IP on a global scale, pulling bits and pieces from the various entries to form its own story, and hopefully enchant a new generation with the wonders of a hypothetical cybernetic future. And surely this decision had nothing to do with the fact that it was topical at the time I started working on this video. So without further ado, let's just jump into it. And FYI, I've been warning people for years that when this day finally came, it would be open season on spoiling the shit out of every nook and cranny of the Ghost in the Shell mythos. So I hope you did your homework. But don't worry too much, spoilers don't really matter in this series anyway. Now, unlike those 7 billion other idiots on this planet, I am at last ready to act as your guide on a journey through this fantastical world of sexy robot babes. And that journey begins here. Well, here it finally is, the Western live-action adaptation of one of the greatest anime and sci-fi series, period. So, first and foremost, if we want to judge the success or failure of this project, by what standard do we make that determination? Things like box office sales, Metacritic ratings, and the controversy surrounding the film are certainly worth discussing, if you're a fucking idiot. More important than any of those topics is the intellectual content of Ghost in the Shell 2017 and the presentation thereof in the film. And as a new addition to one of the most cerebral and yet enduring anime series of all time, created by complete outsiders, we can judge it on two fronts. As the prophet once spoke,
is the work functionally good? And is the work contextually good?
The former question involves examining if and how the film accomplished the goals it set out for itself, with the latter involving judging the impact of this entry on the larger series and exploring the ways in which it contributes to the conversation begun by the previous entries. The combination of these two approaches will let us understand how effective this film was at delivering upon the promise inherent in its name to the Western audience it wished to reach.
By the way, for some reason I've seen a lot of discussion about the canonicity of the film relative to the rest of the series, so it bears mentioning that Masamune himself, the creator of the series, has implied that he sees each entry as its own separate universe, to be judged separately for its strengths and weaknesses as an adaptation of the core ideas of Ghost in the Shell. And considering that our hero Motoko now has a grand total of 3 fully fleshed out origin stories among the universes, I would have to agree with that assessment. Masamune also makes it clear that he believes none of the versions of Ghost in the Shell, at least the ones that existed in 2009 when he made this comment, perfectly captured the ideal adaptation he envisions, which includes his original manga. He hoped that the series would continue to be adapted and refined as time went on. And I agree that Ghost in the Shell is a series perfectly suited to a process of continual refinement and expansion of its ideas with further additions to the series. So keep in mind, I'm not one of these cultural purists. I am fully prepared to judge this film on its merits, and would be more than willing to accept it as a happy addition to the Ghost in the Shell scripture, if it stacks up to the pedigree. We're just gonna judge it by its merits and see where it lands.
So on that note, let us now turn to consider the kookiest member of the Ghost in the Shell family.
Ghost in the Shell 2017, I guess. That's not gonna be annoying at all. God, I love reboot names.
Alright, Ghost in the Shell 2017 fucking sucks.
I could go on all day listing the ways this movie fails to live up to its name, and I think I will, thanks. But before we get into the details, here's the thesis of this discussion that I want you to keep in mind. The stupid mystery plot of this movie asking, who is the Major, misses the whole point of Ghost in the Shell. Movie, you're distracting us with a retarded mystery plot about corporate greed from the actually interesting question of, what will the world be like when day-to-day life involves people tricked the fuck out with cyborg shit? Now, I don't want to make out like this movie has absolutely nothing of interest to say, but it's a matter of proportionality. Yes, the movie manages to be very attractive looking and even at times portray its cyberpunk world with a level of realism I appreciated. But narratively, both as a self-contained film and as a part of the series, it is a failure. And I'm going to explain to you in detail exactly why. For starters, let's take a moment to think about the director of our new film, Rupert Sanders. This version of the story is a sort of amalgam formed of bits and pieces from the various Ghost in the Shell series, but it draws most strongly from the 1995 film. You know, the one that everybody loves, directed of course by Mamoru Oshii. Now, with regards to Sanders, it's interesting to note that his only previous commercial film was the one, the only, Snow White and the Huntsman, released in 2012. That certainly makes me confident he's going to be able to live up to the intellectual challenge that is Ghost in the Shell. As a matter of fact, Sanders is known more for the commercials he has directed rather than the films. It makes me think that's probably the angle he approached this movie from. You know, wanting to make sure they include the kind of trailer fodder scenes that a blockbuster needs to put asses into theater seats, as opposed to the slow, meticulous philosophical discussion that filled the original film to massive critical acclaim. No disrespect to commercial directors, but expecting anything from a guy with this pedigree on the same level as the stray dog of anime himself, Oshii, a man well known to value his artistic vision over the commercial success or popularity of his films, is, frankly, insane. And considering that, it's no surprise that this produced a box office failure, at least according to Wikipedia, which is never wrong. To me, it felt like they were trying to cram a square block into a round hole with this adaptation, attempting to repackage this quintessentially Japanese story for an American audience. Not because of any of that cultural appropriation stuff, America is cultural appropriation, but rather because they tried to turn Ghost in the Shell into Transformers, when really they should have aimed more for The Matrix, which everyone knows was itself inspired by Ghost in the Shell. And what do you know? One of the 3 screenwriters for this film wrote 3 of the Transformers movies. What do you know about that shit? I wondered from the start how valuable this IP would be when repackaged for the West, and I think I got my answer. Let's turn now to examine the character at the center of it all, Ms. Mara Killian, aka The Major.
5 o'clock, get a call to go blading at the skate park down by the mall. But my mom says I gotta prevent hostile aliens from annihilating this wall. With the strength of 1,070 men, I guess I really shouldn't complain. Still, I wish I could go for a walk without rusting in the rain. It's enough to fill my brain. So welcome to my life as a teenage robot. The story of my life as a teenage robot. My teenage robot life.
Have a think about this. Our new film quickly gets to a recreation of one of the original film's most memorable scenes, a beautifully animated sequence showing the assembly process of the Major's cybernetic body. This is, without a doubt, a fantastic way to start the movie. Not only does it create for us fans an association with the classic film, but it also does what that scene did originally, introduce us to the world of Ghost in the Shell and the idea of the cybernetic body. Watching a human body being assembled, polished, and brought to life in this cyberpunk setting creates in every human, without fail, an existential terror at the ramifications of transhumanism. What is a human being? Are we defined by our physical form? Is consciousness a product of that form, the crude matter of the brain, or is it able to exist independently? If we are able to create human bodies, are we also able to create consciousness or souls? These are all the questions that flood your mind just by watching this sequence without one word of dialogue. It was brilliant then, and it's brilliant now. However, there is a huge difference in the context surrounding those scenes in either film. In the original, the first scene in the movie is a badass action sequence. It introduces the Major as a fierce, kick-ass soldier first and foremost. She's in control, she's perfect, and she gets the job done. Crucially, it is only after establishing that we then see the body assembling scene, as a way to introduce to us how Motoko came to exist as she does now. And finally, we see her wake up as if the assembly scene was a distant memory revisited in a dream. It shapes her character and sense of self, but it does not define her. Mara Killian, on the contrary, is right from the start defined by her helplessness, and this is why I hate her. This is the first time we see the Major in the film. Helpless, in a hospital bed, completely under the control of those around her. But, to be charitable, we don't actually know it's her here the first time we watch. Well, how about the first time we see Scarlett Johansson, the cybernetic body? After the admittedly beautiful cyberbody assembly scene in our new film, Cyber Hansen awakes, gasping for breath, powerless, terrified, and barely able to control herself. This is the complete opposite of how the character is introduced to us in the original film. Mara Killian is a literal, helpless newborn at the mercy of the technology that keeps her alive, not the master of it that Motoko Kusanagi is. Just so you know, the Major has never, ever looked as pathetic as this in any of her incarnations. And yes, of course this was a deliberate choice to portray the character in this way. But was it a good choice? Let's think about that as we move along. And keep in mind, that opening scene has no particular significance to the events that unfold. It was just a way of introducing us to the world of Ghost in the Shell. Because in Ghost in the Shell, Motoko is not special. Yes, she is an incredible hacker, programmer, tactician, and warrior who I literally love in real life because she is perfect. However, she's not Cyborg Jesus. She is a full-body cyborg in a world full of full-body cyborgs. What makes Motoko special is her acceptance of these technological advances and her pragmatic approach to utilizing them to live her life to the fullest and do her damn job. And I love her for it. The new film took that in a different direction. Right from the start, the Major is someone to be pitied, not respected or admired for her confidence and abilities. This sets a clear tone for how the audience will come to view her character. This is the first critical way that the film deviates from the original intent of the story and is indicative of the different way our writers interpret this character. So why do you think they would do this? We'll get back to that. Let's return to our story. When Major Mara Killian wakes up, she is told she's the first full cyborg in history. She has no memory, she is struggling to even breathe, and she's the property of the Hanka Corporation. And of course, she goes on to spend much of the movie lamenting her situation as a cyborg despite the literal superpowers she's obtained. The problem with this approach is a very fundamental one to the way the screenwriters approach the idea of having a cybernetic body. In Masamune's original manga, the idea of having a cybernetic body being a burden or a curse is never once brought up. That version of the story has a very procedural style to it, as Section 9, the special police force Motoko leads, deals with cybercrime in their city. The story absolutely does not frame the reality of cybernetics in their world as anything other than a new tool that has been added to humanity's toolbox. Hell, in most versions of Motoko's past, she was cyberized in order to save her life. She would be dead without this technology. She appreciates that, makes the most of the life she has, and is thankful for the opportunity. Yes, there are certainly people who take advantage of this new technology, and the implications of that can be absolutely terrifying. The ability to hack into people's minds, rewrite their memories, and directly control their actions, for example. But the people who do that are criminals, and our heroes, Section 9, are here to stop those people. The vast majority of people in this world enjoy their cybernetics as a boon. Most people aren't getting brain hacked act like some of the victims in the story are. There is absolutely no doom and gloom atmosphere attached to the basic idea of transhumanism in the manga. Rather, the story prefers to go into unbelievable detail as to exactly how this technology works, right down to the chemical makeup of the materials. This is one of my favorite aspects of the original story, and it shows great maturity on Masamune's part, that he approaches the topic in such a rational, detailed, and matter-of-fact way. Please, read the fucking manga. The new movie, however, seems utterly incapable of appreciating that. Spoilers, the villain turns out to be the CEO of Hanka, the company that made the Major's new body. And guess what, team? Turns out that the Major wasn't some poor girl who barely survived a terrible accident that killed her whole family by being cyberized. She was actually a technology-hating hippie who the company kidnapped and forcibly turned into a cyborg, wiping her memory in the process. They also did this to all her friends, almost all of which died before the process even finished. Wow, we're really carrying on the spirit of calm, reasonable analysis of what a transhumanistic society would be like. Technology isn't evil at all, right, kids? Now, admittedly, Major Mara's progression through the film does, in its own way, depict her coming to terms with her cybernetic existence. The problem for me is, I don't fucking buy it. Motoko Kusanagi, in every other version of the story, has tremendous reason to be thankful for the technology that has saved her life and gives her purpose. What reason does Major Mara have to be a plucky cyborg soldier? She's making the best of it, I guess?
She'd write her manifestos about how technology was destroying the world.
My thoughts exactly. It's been clear from the start that of all available options, this movie is primarily inspired by the original 1995 film, which, in addition to being the most famous interpretation, is also by far the darkest version of the story tonally. Now, as shocking as this may be, there are those of us who think that that old film itself laid that dour note on a bit too thick to perfectly convey the intention of the original story, misleading public perception of the series, while succeeding more so in other iterations. This movie makes an attempt to mimic that tone, but ends up overshooting the goal, and as a result, the problem has been compounded. However, even in the 1995 film, the core idea was not about the breakdown of society or individual rights due to technological advancement, but about the evolution of it as well as our very species. In a nutshell, a pure examination of human identity and consciousness, and how our understanding of those concepts may change as technology improves and seeps into our very bodies, done so in an awe-inspiring way, which is why it is so beloved. There's much more to say on the subject of these differences, but that's a story for another time. The point is, none of these series have failed to express that unique perspective of Ghost in the Shell until now. It seems to me that there is a tendency to make assumptions about cyberpunk-type stories, that because the world being depicted looks strange and unsettling, this must be a sign of a negative trajectory due to unfettered capitalism or whatever. Something you might see in a story like Blade Runner, where the only centrally plot-relevant evolution of technology is in the creation of the slave class of replicants that our story focuses on the mistreatment of. In Ghost in the Shell, our heroes have questioned their very existence countless times, but have always remained optimistic about the future, and more importantly, their ability to obtain justice. That is their job, after all. To run with this negativity as the core narrative of your version of the story, well, it just ain't what Ghost in the Shell has ever been about. Straight up, this version of the Major is a betrayal. Not just because she's different, but because it flies in the face of the original point of the character and the overall story. What is there to say but bruh? The one responsible for her situation is, of course, our main villain, Cutter, CEO of Hanka Robotics, the only company that matters doing literally everything related to cyberization. So Cutter here, he's a simple man. He just wants the damn 5-0 to leave him to his business of performing literal human sacrifice so he can finally achieve that 5% increase in market share of his cybernetic products. He's a bad, bad dude. There's just not a lot to him, and he kinda sucks. Wait, what? His eyes are different colors? Stop the fucking presses! This is an insane cyborg future! Ah! Anyway, I don't need to go into any more detail about this guy. He's just greedy and will cheat, murder, and steal anything he needs to get what he wants. Anyone on his side is evil, and anyone who opposes him is de facto good, regardless of any specific actions. For comparison, the original president of Hanka Precision Instruments was one of the countless manufacturers involved with robotics and cyberization. And yes, the story around him features human trafficking as well, spurred on by his company's lagging performance in AI development. To compensate, he set up a ghost dubbing ring to make special specialty prototype Tomland robots that are advertised as such, but are actually converted cyborgs, aka people, hence their more human-like mannerisms and abilities, which we all agree is fucked up beyond belief. They've been working with gangs to supply trafficked children to be converted into these mind slaves, which in this business, I remind you, is the exception, not the rule, and the good guys put a stop to it, letting the rest of the industry continue on its ethically sound, merry way. Interestingly, when those kidnapped kids get innocent people hurt and killed when they reprogram some cyborgs as part of their cry for help, they also are criticized for it, because, believe it or not, good intentions do not always justify any and all means. See how there's a little more complexity going on in the narrative here? That's the good stuff. Anyway, that was just one of the many cases Section 9 dealt with in the manga. Needless to say, it is not a dedicated statement on the evils of technology, the sins of the corporate world, and a condemnation of murdering tree huggers when they even minorly obstruct your agenda. Though I gotta say, Hanka's making some good points on that one. Oh, and by the way, the President character from past Ghost in the Shell iterations was about 1,000,000,000% cooler to boot, as he was a weirdo who insisted on keeping an outdated, boxy cyborg body even when the wife and kids keep yapping in his ear to get one slightly less existentially terrifying, yada yada yada. Masculine as hell, truly a Chad.
But let's reflect for a moment. Every single iteration of Ghost in the Shell has been about embracing technological progress and taking a mature, sober look at some of the problems that will naturally arise and finding solutions to them.
That old classic sci-fi.
Just because Ghost in the Shell has always centered around Section 9, an anti-cybercrime task force, the story was never about the good guys versus technology. And painting it that way now, as the reintroduction of the series to the West, is fucking disgusting and an insult to Masamune's vision. But hey, maybe they didn't mean it that way and they just fucked up.
You're reducing a complex human to a machine.
I don't think of her as a machine. She's a weapon.
And while it is all extremely offensive and cripples the entire story, it is not the most infuriating change to the movie. That honor lies squarely on Chief Aramaki. Frankly, I can't help but be disgusted by what they did with Aramaki. From the perspective of a standalone film, he functions perfectly well as the tough chief with a good heart who ain't afraid to be a badass when the shit hits the fan with a bit of a dark streak to him.
My problem here is simply that the kind of badass action shit that Aramaki does at the end of this film, including murdering people he's already disarmed in cold blood and encouraging the Major to follow her heart and execute the big bad when they have him cornered, carrying out the act personally, is an insult to the original Chief Aramaki, a straight fucking arrow public security man who would not stand for this kind of vigilante bullshit. Just go a step further and consider the ramifications. The pure counterproductivity in revenge killing Cutter, throwing away the opportunity to have him testify in court and, you know, do some legal bullshit to hold all those involved accountable, since we know Cutter did not act alone. This is the way Aramaki has always operated, and seeing as there was a whole corporation involved, that's the kind of shit that's gonna be necessary to stop this from ever happening again. And don't give me no shit about how, cause he's rich, he'd have gotten off on some technicality. Aramaki has put away far more powerful business and political leaders than Cutman here. It's kind of his whole thing. He'll figure it out. Don't get me wrong, I think death is a fitting punishment for a murderer and human trafficker who has done what this guy has. But this just isn't what Aramaki would do, and it's not what he stands for. The old ape is the real, unsung hero of the Ghost in the Shell series. He's always been a man of his age, leading his team and operating at the crossroads of public security with domestic and international politics. He's never been averse to bending a few laws when necessary, or using dirty tricks, information warfare, and cold hard killing to get the job done, but always for a greater purpose and never gratuitously. I mean, fuck, this is just basic political maneuvering, which he is supposed to be a master at. Don't murder people when you have them cornered and create more problems for yourself when you've already won. That self-control and ability to keep his eye on the greater prize is what got him to his high station in life, whereby he is able to do good for the world, not indulging in a heat-of-the-moment passion. It's what made him so inspirational and the moral rock of the series. But this kind of bullshit is not only out of character, it's beneath him.
I know Beat Takeshi is this big badass Japanese film star who everyone wants to see act super cool on screen, but I don't give a shit about Takashi's stage presence. I give a shit about the character of Aramaki, and this quite simply is not him. I could talk more about Section 9 as a whole, but there's basically nothing to say about the individual characters. Bato was a fun character, as he always is, and I would say he is the truest to his counterparts. I legitimately enjoyed that character. I will say, however, that Togusa didn't do shit, and that's too bad, because he's a great character. Also, who the fuck are these people? And now it's time to discuss the other major character in this story, KUZE. As an adaptation of the original character, I don't think you'll be surprised when I tell you that they got literally everything wrong. But let's be fair, that's clearly not what they were going for, and the KUZE presented in this story makes perfect sense for the narrative and ideas they were hoping to convey. A little confusing why they would even call him KUZE, but that's small potatoes. The real problem is, as I said before, the ideas behind this character completely fly in the face of what Ghost in the Shell is all about. In this story, KUZE, the shadowy hacker picking off Hanka employees from the shadows, is revealed to be one of Hanka's failed experiments at creating full-body cyborgs. Initially, he is treated as the villain until he meets the Major and informs her of their mutual creation via Hanka's human trafficking/experimentation practices. After which point we realize that he is a victim himself, simply trying to punish the people he feels are responsible for turning him into a cyborg against his will and then throwing him out like garbage when he had defects. This all works fine for a film about rebelling against corporate tyranny and the abuses of technological advancement, but that's only one piece of what Ghost in the Shell is about. But we've been over this.
The name KUZE comes from the soldier-turned-terrorist/freedom fighter from SAC 2nd G, who led a refugee uprising but was truly being manipulated by other political actors for their own ends.
Strangely enough, KUZE also functions as the surrogate for the puppeteer in this adaptation, with the film going to great lengths to emulate the character and its role here. And of course, this is a huge fuck up, because KUZE and the puppeteer have nothing in common. On the one hand is KUZE, a forcibly cyberized terrorist looking for revenge against the corporation that did this to him, and on the other, the puppeteer, a military AI that has grown sentient and is trying to reason out the nature of its existence and the higher levels of consciousness that lie beyond its understanding. Do they sound similar at all? No? Then why the fuck are they copying scenes of him shot for shot? They have so clearly tried to emulate the style of the original film without understanding what the point of it all was. For example, when the puppeteer offers Motoko the chance to experience the higher level of consciousness it has discovered, what we might consider God, KUZE on the other hand says, "Let's escape to the internet." Now, the idea of detaching consciousness from the body is of course fascinating and is the fundamental principle behind much of Ghost in the Shell. But the puppeteer story was so far beyond just that one concept. It was about the ability to create real consciousness by evolving an AI, and then, because this being exists as pure data, the ability to evolve that consciousness and connect to a network on a higher plane of existence that we humans could only understand in religious terms. Whether any of this is true or even possible is not the issue. What's relevant is that the filmmakers felt that all of that, which is contained in the original film, just didn't make the cut for this one. And this is the real problem with Ghost in the Shell 2017. It labors so hard to barely grasp the ideas that everyone watching the other films quickly understood, and leaves everything else on the cutting room floor. Basically, it's a dumb action movie with cyborgs. Needless to say, I did not care for this interpretation of KUZE's character. Interestingly, the one aspect of the original KUZE from Second Gig they chose to keep in this film was the idea that KUZE and Motoko knew each other from before they became cyborgs and have a special relationship based on that. And that's where I hit another brick fucking wall with the motivations of these characters. If you happen to recall one of the best stories told in the Ghost in the Shell universe in episode 11 of Second Gig, you might remember this. KUZE was a little boy paralyzed after a plane crash until a little cyborg girl came along and encouraged him to go through with the cyberization process. And that little girl was Motoko. I'm not going to go into the scene in more detail now, but ultimately what this represents is the good that can come from this technology. An optimistic, pragmatic view of the benefits that cyberization technology could have on people in these situations. Not reactionary, cowardly cringing from the very concept of becoming a fucking cyborg. Because that seems to be the vein they chose to tap into instead. Oh man, isn't cyberization creepy and gross? How about you fucking die? Can you even fucking fathom my frustration when the new origins of these characters have them living in terror of the technology that saved their lives in this alternate universe? It's beyond insulting and tramples on the legacy of the series. In their attempt to emulate the atmosphere of the original Ghost in the Shell movie with all its darkness and grittiness, they completely lost the optimistic undercurrent inherent in simply depicting a functioning society full of cyborgs. Fuck! Now, let's give a fair shake to the one story element that they really did try to pull off: the false memories plot. So throughout the film, we see Motoko taking this gel-like medication she's been told is necessary for her body to keep functioning properly. But in the end, it turns out that this stuff has in fact been erasing the Major's real memories from when she was human, which manifest as these glitchy artifacts throughout the film. After learning of this and discarding the gel, the Major eventually remembers who she once was and what happened to her. She was a young Japanese woman living with her friends protesting against technological development. Right. In any case, it is rather interesting to think that the Major actually was a Japanese woman, ripped of her identity and repackaged in Scarlett Johansson's white-ass body, and that the injustice of that, what you might call the individual cultural appropriation, was the very thing the Major fought against the whole film. It's almost like the movie was making a similar point to the people criticizing the film. Maybe they should have seen the movie before shitting on it. Nah. In any case, this idea of memory manipulation is touched at many times throughout the film and is tied into the identity crisis the Major experiences when she begins to realize it is being done to her as well. This is, admittedly, a fascinating and terrifying concept, which could be a real consequence of treating memory as hardware and data that other people have access to. I just wish the film focused to any degree on the positives that could come out of it, like, oh, I don't know, curing Alzheimer's forever? Regardless, this all ties into the theme of corporate control and corruption. This is also reinforced by a little motif that pops up throughout the film, a little ritual of the Major giving consent to procedures performed on her. It's later in the film, however, when she realizes that her consent was never necessary, revealing Hanka's ability to treat her as property.
Lol, that's not allowed. And of course, the film ends with Aramaki murdering Cutter on the Major's behalf after she triumphantly gives her consent to do so,
completing her conquest of this corporate machine that controlled her. Now she is free. With her cyberized body and superhuman abilities, the Major is now able to become the ass-kicking cyborg superwoman she was always meant to be. The problem is that she wasn't from the start. I understand what the writers of this film were attempting to do. This is effectively the prequel to the first Ghost in the Shell movie in many ways. It explains the Major's origin, introduces the concept of full cyborgs to the world, and sets the stage for adventures to come. And while they somewhat confuse the issue by also attempting to partially retell the story of that famous film, I can understand where they were coming from. The problem is that that prequel already exists. It's an OVA called Ghost in the Shell Arise, and it was much, much better than this. And really, that should be telling, because Arise is not a masterpiece, but it is significantly more faithful to the ideas that made Ghost in the Shell great, and that's the real problem with this film. In an attempt to adapt the story of Ghost in the Shell for a wide Western audience, it is obvious that the writers felt it would be enough to copy the iconography and some of the tangible details of the Ghost in the Shell universe in order to create a box office success. Clearly, they believed that attempting to include too many of the ideas from previous entries in the series would either be outside their ability to write or outside the ability of the audience to understand. And I don't fault them for realizing that. It's probably true to a large extent. But this is Ghost in the Shell. The origin of the problem here started right when they decided to make this movie for this audience. Ghost in the Shell cannot be dumbed down and used as a profitable IP to push a mediocre film onto the masses. Because what people like about Ghost in the Shell are the very ideas you've stripped from it. You have taken a franchise that dives into innumerable transhumanistic ideas and boiled it down to one or two of the most basic ones that will allow you to copy and paste the most famous iconography from the series. At worst, it's intellectual laziness. At best, it's bad marketing. I know we live in a time where blockbusters cost unbelievable amounts of money to produce, and as a consequence, studios only want to bet on established IPs. But the fact that they had to reach out to a series that's, let's not kid ourselves, not that marketable, to try to turn a profit just shows how desperate they really are. And the fact that this movie could make $169 million and still be considered a flop, well, There's your evidence. But herein lies the ultimate question. Did this movie succeed at its goal? Clearly, it does not stand up to scrutiny as an intellectual expansion to the Ghost in the Shell universe, but is that really what it was going for? I would say no. This film was prepared to be the starter pack to the world of Ghost in the Shell, with just a fraction of the ideas that the series expands upon in its numerous iterations. To some, this could be the jumping off point that leads them into the wider series and down an expanding network of ideas that begins here. But unfortunately, this film betrays so many of the core ideas of the Ghost in the Shell world that mediocre effort cannot be sufficient to justify it. However, there is one aspect where I believe this film does have a purpose in the Ghost in the Shell canon, and that is to tangibly demonstrate what a cyberized civilization might look like in the real world. This isn't so much the design of the city or the holograms on the streets, but the details of the average people walking around in this world and interacting with each other using cybernetics. We've seen plenty of this in the animated adaptations, but I think there is a real, tangible value in seeing what a world like this could actually look like in a more true-to-life style. And I legitimately appreciate the thought that clearly went into this. And my favorite scene in this film isn't a recycled one from an old classic or a big action set piece, but a simple, quiet little scene completely original to this film. It's the scene where the Major hires a prostitute just to sit quietly with her and let her touch her skin. Nothing sexual, nothing violent. The Major, a complete cyborg, just wants to experience the sensation of real skin that she no longer possesses. The fact that the Major would actually hire a prostitute for something like this is the boldest, most character-building moment in the film. I just wish the film had the courage to spend more time like this and less on action set pieces and remaking the original, because they've proved they do have interesting things to say. And ironically, this moment is one of the most true to the original character who, I bet you didn't know this, literally wrote sex simulation software as a side gig. That's right, this woman creates cyborg porn. She's no stranger to the sex-pushing underbelly of society. I love seeing Motoko unabashedly solicit a prostitute while continuing the writer's unique narrative to this film, and in a way that's so quintessentially human. That's how you build character. Unfortunately, that is essentially the only scene of its kind in the film. Cowardice and stupidity are the name of the game here, folks. Everybody, I don't hate this film. It is just massively disappointing as a Ghost in the Shell adaptation. And now, you should know why. Bato, the character design, the scene I just described, there is legitimate good here. But it is vastly outweighed by the bad, resulting in a film that is more disappointing the more you know about the subject matter, and that's never good. Finally, I'd just like to say, everyone, we don't need to be scared of technology. Fire can burn us, but we all know the good we've been able to do with it. And that goes from everything from the printing press to firearms. All of them are merely tools, and it's up to us to control how and when they're used. The same goes for the cyberization technology depicted in the world of Ghost in the Shell. The series has always shown our Section 9 heroes fighting against abuses of that technology, but the point was never that technology is evil. Their entire civilization depends on it and has flourished with it. But in those rare instances when there are abuses of these systems, that's when Section 9 steps in to make it all right. Not by removing evil cyborg technology, but by removing these individual abuses. Let's not get swept up in the narrative that we need to oppose certain technologies for being fundamentally incompatible with our species. We create them, so we need to master them, and in time, we will.
Thank you for listening, everyone. I hope you learned something here today. I wish I had a little more time to talk about the other entries in the Ghost in the Shell series. I have so much more to say on all of them. But for now, let's leave it at that. Oh, but before I go, there was one more topic I wanted to address. Years ago, when this movie was just coming out, I was excited to dive in and see how it stacked up compared to the rest of the series. But unfortunately for me, it was hard to focus on the juicy goodness of that discussion due to the presence of a heavy cloud that loomed over the entire production and release of this film. The cloud of controversy, with the accusation that it was committing the sins of cultural appropriation and whitewashing, primarily through the casting of Scarlett Johansson as the Major. And I'd say that it absolutely dominated the public discourse surrounding the film. All this nerdy nitpicking in reviews based on the plot, like the one I've just given you, none of that shit matters, cause this is the issue we needed to be focusing on. Well, now that we've had a good long while to stew on the movie and consider these concerns dispassionately, let's review. The fact is, this was never the story of Public Security Section 9, the Mobile Armored Riot Police of Nihama Prefecture, pride of the great state of Nippon. This is the story of some kind of weird Amero-Japa hypercorporation supplying some miscellaneous government with a cyber-enhanced crime-fighting task force for some reason that happens to occasionally enjoy performing human sacrifice. To put it simply, this project has been its own thing from the start, not just seizing a Japanese story and slapping Whitey in there carelessly, but handling the issue on the script level in a way that works towards the point the film was going for. A point I suspect many of those who had these concerns might appreciate if they actually saw the film, and it deserves at least that much credit. If there was a time to complain about these kinds of issues, it was when the rights to a live-action adaptation of Gits were being sold to Steven Indy was asking for it Spielberg in 2008. The near universal failure of these kinds of adaptations due to the inevitable loss of data during transfer, or any number of reasons, is more than enough cause for everyone to unite and say, fuck you, stop. But now, not just jumping to conclusions based on trailers and press releases with an incentive to stoke public ire to drive that sweet controversy traffic, it seems to me that for what it is, a Hollywood adaptation of a Japanese film, the movie was pretty damn tasteful on the subject of the Major's origin story and casting. If that's your thing. But how about we hear from an expert, our old director, Oshii, who clearly doesn't give a shit about any of this. It's almost like he's saying that in a story of this kind, the type of body doesn't really matter. Go figure. Well, it's been years now since this biz went down, and what's become of it all? For me, I still care about Ghost in the Shell, with all me Irish heart. But here's a question for you. Does anyone worldwide still care about this controversy? When was the last time you heard about it? That's what I thought. One of the main points of art is to depict worlds and situations that compel the audience to ask, what if? And apply the answers within their own lives. In a word, to inspire. I have my issues with this movie, but nonetheless, I look back and I see precious attention that could have gone toward the concepts within the Ghost in the Shell mythos that I consider fascinating and vital to the future of humanity squandered on all of this. To those of you who feel that this is as it should be, and that the cost of focusing on these issues, no matter how flimsy their foundation may turn out to be, at the expense of the central ideas of the series, was worth it, to you all, I'd like to say this.
You say the price of one movie is a price that you're willing to pay. I cry when I see Hollywood set to fuck up another franchise. Why am I sad? I thought that we had an arrangement about anime, 'cause you're so fucking bad at getting the point of the work, you fucking chads. You'll forget in just a bit. You'll remember you don't give a shit about the Ghost in the Shell, but it's new and shiny, so oh well. Series rise, franchise fall, just another shit box office draw. And you guess this one's fine, but you're really more excited for the Fast and Furious 9. Da 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 ya da 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 ya da 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 ya da 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 da. You say you hate Johansson and it can't go on. Her skin's too alabaster to play this role. But please don't change the subject. You're fucking up the subject. Transhumanistic subject. I swear it's a good subject. You don't care. you don't care. I bet you didn't even know Mochiko's body isn't even necessarily Asian, plus this story is literally about detaching your conscience from your body, making concepts like race completely obsolete, not to mention the fact that Mochiko is in fact an Asian woman. Holy fuck, you're all fucking idiots. You'll forget every time it was just one more excuse to whine for your flag, for your cause. You would crush the series in your jaws. Some of us really care about what Masamune tried to share, but when push comes to shove, you don't give a fuck about her. Throw her right under the bus. Da 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 da. Controversy!